A grand total of 4 trade tokens, 15,000 gold, 90 gems, a magical chest, and a super magical chest can all be yours upon finishing the CRL World Finals 20-win Triple Draft Challenge. Here is everything you need to know to maximize your winnings. Hey guys, Legendaray here, and with the advent of the Clash Royale League World Finals happening this Saturday, there is a crazy new 20-win tournament for you all to play. In this 10-gem re-entry challenge, you can not only get another chance to flex that 20-win player profile and badge, but you also get a heap ton of rewards. So today, I'm going to be going over a rather comprehensive guide to tell you my best tips to get those 20 wins. So if you enjoy this video, subscribe down below, follow me on my socials, blah blah blah, and without further ado, let's get right into it. So let's start off this guide by giving an intricate description of exactly how the draft mode works and how this can play into your advantage. So the basics are rather simple. You get 8 draft picks where you choose between one of 3 cards. Now here's the part where you should pay attention to. Among every single draft pick that you receive, there are a total of 10 categories of cards that you can choose in between. 5 of these categories are guaranteed. So in each draft pick, you are 100% going to have a win condition, a small spell, a big spell, an anti-air card, and a cheap anti-air card. Now, there are of course 3 more spots left in the deck, so you're gonna get to pick from 3 of the following categories: tank support, anti-tanks, splashers, mini tanks, and distractions. Again, in each of these sections that you receive, 3 of the cards will be presented for you to choose from, and 3 more will be presented to your opponent. In addition to that, you guys share a pool of cards. This means that if you see a card, that means that your opponent will 100% not have that card in their deck. So now that we've gone over exactly how these draft tables work, let's take a look at exactly how to approach building a deck in this triple draft type environment. So skill in Clash Royale will only get you so far. Even the best players will struggle with a poorly made deck. Therefore, in all draft modes, and specifically in Triple Draft, putting together a well-balanced deck is half the battle. Now, I get it, everyone has a different playstyle. Some people like fast cycle decks, others like to play the long game with control, and some other players maybe prefer beatdown over anything else. So, of course, everything that I will go over has exceptions and variations, but in general, every single well-balanced deck in the meta will follow a few general rules. But Triple Draft is slightly different. A majority of decks will already be somewhat balanced because, like I covered earlier, your decks are already guaranteed a win condition, 2 spells, and even 2 different air counters. So the challenge in Triple Draft is to pick a deck that works better synergistically than your opponents. Essentially, if you pick a deck that synergizes much better than your opponents, you may have already won the match before it has even started. So it's very important that you build a deck that functions very smoothly. So let's get into my biggest tips right now. Tip number 1, initial pick. So the initial pick, and oftentimes the second card choice, is honestly up to personal preference. This is because at this point you have no basis on what your deck is going to look like. So what I would recommend is to pick the card that you are often the most comfortable with, and then once you have a base card locked in, you can begin to create a deck around this card. Now of course, the order that you get these card picks is random, so if you get something such as small spells, you can really pick anything that you want, but even that may have an impact on your final choices. For example, if this was your first pick, just pick what you want. I would personally pick arrows because they're honestly one of the best small spells at the moment, but that also means that you may end up with a much more expensive deck. Picking the snowball, on the other hand, opens more synergies with tanks to reset things such as Inferno Dragons, and still offers a lot of versatility for a much cheaper elixir cost. Finally, picking the log generally means that you will be running a more ground-based rush type deck, such as the Hog or the Elixir Golem, where your win conditions need a full area of denial in order to be effective. Of course, there are a few exceptions, such as, if you see the healer, pick the healer, and if you see other cards like E-Barbs and stuff like that, just don't pick them. Tip number 2, analyze your opponent's choices. So in Triple Draft, you also get to see the 3 cards that your opponent gets to choose from. This can be great because if you're big brain, you can even keep some of these cards in your mind to pick counters to. The simplest version of this is within a single draft pick. For example, let's say you're picking between cards in the anti-air section, and you get to choose between the Magic Archer, the Wizard, and the E-Drag. So, you go ahead and look at your opponent's choices, and you see Minion Horde, Inferno Dragon, and Hunter. In this case, although you could probably make an argument for the Wizard, I would personally go with the E-Drag, because it can not only reset the Inferno Dragon, which can come in handy if you picked any tanks, but it also does a rather effective job against the Minion Horde as well, being able to chain zap them away in just a few shots. Now, this can also apply to later draft picks as well. For example, let's say your opponent got to choose between the win conditions Royal Hog, Elixir Golem, and Wall Breakers. Then, in a future pick, you get to choose between the Bowler, Bandit, and Elite Barbarians. Well, I think you get the gist, because you would obviously pick the Bowler because he would excel against every single one of the win conditions that your opponent can choose from. Of course, if the choice was between something such as the Bowler, the Sparky, and the Bomber, then the choice can get a little bit tricky, and here is where you will take a look at synergies and elixir costs. Tip number 3, synergies. Now this is the part of the video that unfortunately will come with practice, but hey, if you start now, you will definitely improve your play in the future. So what I would recommend is that you get an idea of exactly what cards go into what archetypes. This way, after you've picked 2 or even just 1 card in your deck, you'll know exactly what type of deck that you are trying to build. For example, here are a few different variations of a beatdown deck. You can see that there are still a wide variety of cards that are being used in this archetype, so if you have any of these cards, you can maybe try and aim to build a big beatdown deck. Now here are a few control decks. Just like with beatdown, having an idea of what cards are in this archetype can really help you create an ultimate goal of what kind of deck you're trying to draft towards. So let's give a few examples. Let's say that you are lucky enough to pick the Ice Wizard and the Tornado for your first few picks. If you're familiar with a lot of the meta Clash Royale decks, you know that common Ice Wizard NATO decks are in Golem Beatdown, Graveyard, and Expo. All of these decks are very control based, meaning that they make positive trades on defense and then counter push with an elixir advantage. So in future picks, try and pick cards that have a control aspect to them. This can be tank busters such as the P.E.K.K.A, win conditions such as the Graveyard, and even other splashers such as Baby Dragon to synergize with the Tornado. Essentially, once you're familiar enough with what decks are popular and what decks function, once you have a few cards selected, you should be able to begin to develop an idea on what type of deck you're trying to aim for in order to make your deck the most effective. Number 4, elixir cost. Finally, picking combos that synergizes well is super important, but you also have to watch the elixir cost of the cards that you pick. Picking all super cheap cards may give you a tough time when it comes to defending your opponent's powerful pushes, and putting together a deck that's way too expensive may be too bulky and leave you starving for elixir. So, while it may seem tempting to pick all of the super effective Sparkies, Golems, Bowlers, and so on, it's also important to watch your deck's elixir cost. Now, while you don't get to see your deck's current average elixir, unfortunately, just looking at the cards that you've drafted can give you a good idea on whether you can afford to pick the more expensive cards. For example, if you're offered a choice between the Bowler and the Bomber, sometimes it's more beneficial to actually pick the Bomber, because if the other cards that you've chosen previously are all on the more expensive side, then the cheaper Bomber may fit in much better. Bomber still does a solid job at splashing units on both defense and offense, so even though Bowler is technically slightly better, it may not synergize as well just because it's too bulky of a card to put in your deck. So, now that I've gone over a few of my top tips, I'm gonna go through a few examples of me drafting a deck live. So hopefully you guys can kind of follow my thought process behind why I pick certain cards. So, let's get into it. So starting off here with my 3 choices, Goblin Barrel I probably won't pick. Lava Hound probably seems like the best way to go because if I pick the Expo, the opponent could pick a Giant and that's just not a fun time. Next up here, we got the Princess, Dark Goblin, and Minions. Here, I'm actually going to go with the Minions because that synergizes well with the Lava Hound, and they also do a pretty good job against his other air units. Next up here, I'm gonna go ahead and choose the Poison because I feel like that can take out a lot of the swarm units that he's gotten. He had the choice of Flying Machine and Archers, so they excel against that. Next up here, I'll go and go with the Tesla for the cheap elixir cost. Again, Ice Spirit for the cheaper elixir cost. Let's see here. Minion Horde, again, synergizing with all of this stuff. Snowball, because it, again, the knockback I think is going to be very valuable in this match. And finally here, I'm gonna go ahead and go with the Night Witch because obviously the Night Witch spawns those bats. Very, very good synergy with the rest of the deck. And so I think that's just gonna give us a much better time. Alright, so in this match starting off here, I'm going to go ahead and pick the Flying Machine because I think it deals very well with the Archers as well as his other choices. Here, I'm going to go ahead and choose the Valkyrie. Valkyrie is probably the more versatile of the mini tanks that I get to choose from. And here, okay, I'm going to actually go with the Executioner. It's got a long range, and because he has a ton of splash units to choose from, I don't think I want to risk running a Minion Horde. Again, the opponent has a lot of splash, so I'm going to actually go ahead and run the Lumberjack. Single targeting units will probably be a bit more effective. So here, I'm going to actually run the NATO, obviously, to synergize with the Executioner. So here, I'm going to go ahead and run the Poison again. He has a lot more of those tankier type units, so that'll obviously deal a lot better. So next up here, I'm going to actually go ahead and choose the Bomber. The Rage isn't too effective, and the Elixir Pump, I just wouldn't pick it in this challenge. And last but not least, we've got our win condition. I'm going to go ahead and go in with a Mega Knight just because I think that kind of rounds out this deck very well. We don't really have a quote-unquote win condition, but it's a very heavily control type deck. Every single card that I've picked has a very heavy tend towards control, so as long as I play smart defense, I should be able to counter push and then reach the opponent's tower. Alright, for this final example here, starting off, I'm going to go ahead and pick the Barbarians. They're a very solid defensive unit, and because he could pick the Royal Recruits, I think the Barbarians will just do a lot better of a job. So here, I'm actually going to go with the Balloon, because again, he could have picked the Royal Recruits, and the Balloon can just fly right over. Next up here, again, he has a lot of units that can be very easily pushed back, so the Bowler, I think, is the correct choice here. Next, the deck is rather expensive, so here I'm actually going to run the E-Wiz. E-Wiz is one of the cheaper options here, and I think he's just a little more effective than those Zappies. Next up, I'm going to go with NATO again because I have the Bowler, and the NATO absolutely synergizes with that. Here, I'm going to go in with a Mega Minion because the Mega Minion can counter the Flying Machine as well as the Archers and those Spear Goblins. Next up here, I'm going to go ahead and go in with a Freeze just to synergize with that Balloon. I think that is a absolutely great synergy. And here the Rascals for a little bit of extra air defense as well as an extra mini tank to help support that Balloon on offense. So now that I've finally gone over a few examples, let's go ahead and sum up everything that we've just covered in the past few minutes. First, we went over exactly how the draft game mode worked and how knowing the draft tables can let you know exactly what to expect in each match. Next, I gave you my 4 general guidelines to building a deck that works well synergistically. The importance of the initial picks, analyzing your opponent's choices, knowing your deck archetypes, and managing your average elixir cost. Finally, I went through a few live examples of my thought processes when picking a deck live. And of course, once you've reached this point, well, just play your normal game of Clash Royale, making sure to always start off on the more defensive side and play more reactively. This playstyle is generally much safer, and unless you've built yourself a super fast cycle deck, which is rather unlikely, is how I would recommend that you approach each of your matches. Hopefully after all of this, you can be a lot more well prepared when it comes to the upcoming Triple Draft Challenge, and hey, maybe you can score a higher number of wins than you expected. Either way, best of luck in this challenge, but unfortunately guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below as well as a subscription to my channel, and as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.